December 26th, Boxing Day. For most people, it's a day of sales, returns, and leftover Christmas turkey. A day to recover from the holiday. A day that should be safe, ordinary, unremarkable. But for some, December 26th became the day their world ended. The day they discovered that monsters don't take holidays, that evil doesn't rest just because the calendar says it should. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 true stories that happened on Boxing Day. 3 stories where the joy of Christmas was immediately followed by unspeakable horror, where families gathered for celebration became targets for execution, where ordinary people going about their day became victims of sudden, random violence. These aren't fictional tales designed to scare you. These are real events, real people. Real blood spilled on December 26th while the rest of the world was opening presents and singing carols. Warning: what you're about to hear is deeply disturbing. These are stories of real violence, real death, real families destroyed. If you're sensitive to descriptions of murder, gang violence, or family annihilation, this is your chance to turn back. For everyone else, welcome to the darkest Boxing Day stories you'll ever hear. This is the Ungodly Hour. Let's begin. Story 1. The Girl Who Went Shopping. 2005, Boxing Day, Toronto, Canada. For Canadians, Boxing Day is like Black Friday in the United States, the biggest shopping day of the year. The day after Christmas, when stores slash prices and shopping districts become packed with thousands of people hunting for deals, returning unwanted gifts, spending gift cards. On this particular Boxing Day, downtown Toronto's Yonge Street was absolutely mobbed. Yonge Street is one of the longest streets in the world, running through the heart of Toronto. And on Boxing Day 2005, it was estimated that over 10,000 people were shopping in just a few city blocks around the Eaton Centre, Toronto's massive downtown shopping mall. Among those thousands of shoppers was a 15-year-old girl named Jane Kreba. Jane was a high school student at Riverdale Collegiate Institute. She was an honor student, straight A's, loved by her teachers, admired by her classmates. She was kind, funny, and had her whole future ahead of her. Her friends described her as someone who always saw the good in people, who could make anyone laugh, who lit up every room she entered. Jane had one quirky detail that everyone who knew her remembered. She loved green apples. Not red apples, not yellow apples, only green Granny Smith apples. She'd eat one almost every day. It was her thing, such a small, innocent detail that made her human, made her real. On December 26, 2005, Jane was with her 17-year-old sister, walking down Yonge Street after shopping at the Eaton Centre. They'd been buying things with their Christmas money, trying on clothes, eating mall food, normal teenage sister stuff on Boxing Day. It was 5:15 p.m. Still light out, but the sun was starting to set. The street was absolutely packed. Shoulder to shoulder, crowds of shoppers carrying bags, street performers, vendors, families with children. Jane and her sister were walking past a Foot Locker store, heading toward Pizza Pizza, a popular Canadian pizza chain, to grab a slice before heading home. What Jane didn't know, what nobody on that crowded street knew, was that 2 rival gangs were about to turn that entire city block into a war zone. The Silent Soldiers and the Point Blank Soldiers. 2 gangs from Toronto neighborhoods, Jane Finch and Lawrence Heights, areas that had been plagued by gang violence for years. These weren't random thugs. These were organized criminal groups with territory, hierarchy, weapons, and a complete disregard for innocent life. Earlier that day, members of one gang had robbed members of the other gang. The details are murky. Some reports say it was a drug deal gone wrong. Others say it was retaliation for a previous shooting. But what's certain is that both gangs decided to settle the score on one of the busiest shopping days of the year, on one of the most crowded streets in Canada, surrounded by thousands of innocent people. At exactly 5:15 p.m., outside the Foot Locker at 348 Yonge Street, members of both gangs encountered each other. Words were exchanged, threats, posturing, and then someone pulled a gun. Within seconds, multiple gang members on both sides drew weapons and opened fire. Not carefully aimed shots, not controlled fire, just chaos. Guns firing in every direction in a crowded shopping district where people were packed so tightly you could barely move. Witnesses described it as sounding like fireworks at first. Pop, 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 a rapid succession of gunshots that echoed off the buildings. People didn't immediately realize what was happening. Some thought it actually was fireworks. Others thought a car had backfired. Then people started screaming, started running, started dropping to the ground. Jane Kreba was exiting the Pizza restaurant, literally walking out the door with her sister, when a single bullet struck her in the back. The bullet entered her upper back, tore through her torso, and lodged in the clothing on the front of her body. The impact threw her forward onto the sidewalk. Her sister was right there, watched it happen, watched Jane collapse, started screaming for help. People surrounded her immediately, strangers trying to help, trying to stop the bleeding, calling 911, begging her to hold on. But the bullet had done catastrophic damage. It had torn through vital organs. Jane was bleeding internally, rapidly, unstoppably. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Toronto has excellent emergency response times, especially downtown. They worked on Jane right there on the sidewalk, trying desperately to stabilize her, to keep her alive long enough to get her to a hospital. But it was too late. Jane Kreba died on the sidewalk outside Pizza on Yonge Street at approximately 5:22 p.m. on December 26, 2005, 7 minutes after being shot, surrounded by strangers trying to save her sister holding her hand. She was 15 years old. She'd been shopping for Boxing Day sales. She'd been in the wrong place at the wrong second. Jane wasn't the only victim. 6 other people were hit by stray bullets in that shooting. A 23-year-old man, a 20-year-old woman, a 43-year-old man, 3 teenagers, all innocent bystanders who'd been shopping, walking down the street, living their lives. They survived. Jane didn't. Police later determined that at least 17 shots were fired during the incident. 17 bullets discharged on a crowded city street filled with families, children, tourists, shoppers. The gang members didn't care. They just pulled triggers and ran. The shooting lasted less than 30 seconds. The chaos lasted for hours. Yonge Street was immediately locked down. Thousands of shoppers were trapped inside stores, unable to leave as police secured the area. The Eaton Center went into lockdown. Police had to process a massive crime scene while dealing with thousands of traumatized witnesses. The investigation was one of the largest in Toronto's history. Police interviewed hundreds of witnesses, collected ballistic evidence, pulled surveillance footage from dozens of cameras along Yonge Street. Within weeks, they'd identified and arrested multiple suspects. 10 people were eventually charged in connection with the shooting, gang members from both the Silent Soldiers and Point Blank Soldiers. But here's the part that makes this story even more infuriating. Most of them received light sentences, despite the fact that they'd opened fire in a crowd of 10,000 people. Despite the fact that they'd killed a 15-year-old girl. Despite the fact that they'd wounded 6 others and traumatized thousands more. Some got a few years, some got less than a decade, some were released on parole relatively quickly, and in a twist that shows just how broken the system can be, one of the people convicted in connection with Jane Kreba's murder was released on parole after serving his sentence. In 2025, 20 years after Jane's death, that same man was charged with first-degree murder again. This time for a shooting in Montreal. He'd been released, went right back to gang activity, and allegedly killed someone else. Jane Kreba's murder changed Canada. Before December 26, 2005, Canadians, especially Torontonians, liked to think of their city as safe. Yes, there was crime, but it wasn't like American cities. It wasn't that bad. That was the narrative. Jane's death shattered that illusion. It forced Toronto to confront its growing gun violence problem. It led to increased police funding, anti-gang initiatives, community programs. It sparked a national conversation about gun crime that continues to this day. Jane's parents became advocates for gun violence prevention. They created the Jane Kreba Foundation to help at-risk youth stay out of gangs. They've spent 20 years trying to make something positive come from their daughter's senseless death. But nothing brings Jane back. Nothing changes the fact that a 15-year-old honor student who loved green apples went shopping on Boxing Day and never came home. Nothing changes the fact that her sister watched her die on a sidewalk surrounded by strangers because gang members decided that their beef was more important than the thousands of innocent lives around them. Jane Kreba should be 35 years old right now. She should have graduated high school in 2008. Should have gone to college, should have had a career, maybe a family, a full life ahead of her. Instead, she's frozen forever at 15, a victim of random violence on what should have been an ordinary day of post-Christmas shopping. Her grave is visited every year on Boxing Day by people who never even knew her, people who were on Yonge Street that day, people who've been touched by her story, people who refuse to forget. Because Jane Kreba's death is a reminder that violence doesn't take holidays, that you can do everything right, be a good student, a good person, make good choices, and still become a victim simply because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that on December 26, 2005, Boxing Day in Toronto stopped being just about shopping and sales. It became the day a city lost its innocence and a 15-year-old girl lost her life. The family who came home for Christmas, December 24, 2007, Christmas Eve, Carnation, Washington. Carnation is a tiny rural town about 25 miles east of Seattle. Population less than 2,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where families have lived for generations, where nothing bad ever happens. It's the kind of town where people don't lock their doors, where neighbors look out for each other, where Christmas is a big deal, lights on every house, community events, that Norman Rockwell, small-town America feeling. On Christmas Eve 2007, Wayne and Judy Anderson were at home, preparing for family to arrive for Christmas. Wayne was 60 years old. Judy was 61. They'd been married for decades, had raised their children in Carnation, and were now in the stage of life where Christmas was about grandchildren and family traditions and making memories. They were wrapping presents in their living room. The Christmas tree was up and decorated. Lights twinkled outside. Everything was perfect, festive, exactly how Christmas Eve should be. What Wayne and Judy didn't know was that their daughter Michelle, their 31-year-old daughter who they'd raised, who they loved, was driving to their house at that exact moment with her boyfriend, Joseph McEnroe, and they were both heavily armed. Michelle Anderson had a history of mental health issues. She'd struggled for years. Her parents had tried to help her, had supported her financially and emotionally, had done everything parents do when their child is suffering. But Michelle had become convinced that her parents owed her money, that they'd stolen from her, that they were taking her brother's side in a family dispute over finances. None of this was true. Her parents hadn't stolen anything. They weren't taking sides. They were just trying to help both their children navigate financial difficulties. But Michelle had worked herself into a rage, had convinced her boyfriend Joseph that they needed to handle this, and they decided that Christmas Eve was the perfect time to do it, because that's when the whole family would be together. Michelle and Joseph arrived at Wayne and Judy's house around 3 p.m. on Christmas Eve. They knocked on the door like normal visitors. Wayne and Judy let them in, happy to see their daughter, ready to celebrate Christmas together. Michelle pulled out a handgun and pointed it at her father. She pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. In that split second, the moment when the gun failed to fire, Wayne and Judy had a chance to understand what was happening, to see that their daughter, their own child, had just tried to murder them. Before they could react, Before they could run or fight or beg, Joseph McEnroe raised his own gun and shot Wayne Anderson multiple times. Wayne collapsed, dying in his living room, the Christmas tree lights still twinkling behind him. Judy tried to run, tried to get away, but Joseph shot her too. Multiple shots. She fell in the hallway, bleeding out feet away from the wrapped Christmas presents she'd been preparing for her grandchildren. Wayne and Judy Anderson died in their home on Christmas Eve, killed by their own daughter and her boyfriend. But Michelle and Joseph weren't done. They spent the next hour cleaning up the blood, meticulously wiping surfaces, mopping floors, trying to hide the evidence of what they'd just done. They dragged Wayne and Judy's bodies outside into the yard and covered them. Then they waited inside the house, sitting among the Christmas decorations, surrounded by family photos, waiting for the next targets to arrive. A few hours later, around 6:30 p.m., Michelle's brother Scott Anderson arrived with his family for Christmas Eve dinner. Scott was 32 years old, a good man, a loving father, devoted to his wife and children. He worked hard, provided for his family, and was excited to spend Christmas with his parents and kids. His wife, Erica, was also 32. She was kind, warm, the type of mother who baked cookies with her kids and read them bedtime stories every night. And they'd brought their children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. Olivia was in kindergarten. She loved Disney princesses and drawing pictures and helping her mom bake. She still believed in Santa Claus. She'd been excited all day about seeing Grandma and Grandpa and opening presents on Christmas morning. Nathan was 3, still in that phase where everything is magical, where Christmas is this big, wonderful mystery full of lights and cookies and presents. He'd been carrying around his favorite stuffed animal all day, clutching it as they drove to his grandparents' house. When Scott, Erica, Olivia, and Nathan walked through the door, they had no idea that Wayne and Judy were already dead, that their bodies were outside in the yard, that Michelle and Joseph had spent hours preparing an ambush. Scott stepped inside first. Michelle shot him immediately, multiple times, point-blank range. Scott Anderson died instantly in his parents' entryway, in front of his wife and children. He didn't even have time to understand what was happening. One second he was walking into his parents' house for Christmas, the next he was dead. Erica started screaming, started trying to grab her children, trying to shield them, trying to get to her phone to call 911. She managed to dial, actually got through to 911, started pleading for help. Michelle shot her before she could finish the call. The bullet hit Erica in the torso. She collapsed but didn't die immediately. Erica Anderson lay on the floor, bleeding in agony, watching in horror as Joseph McEnroe turned his gun toward her children. Olivia and Nathan were crying, terrified, probably calling for their mommy and daddy, not understanding what was happening, why there was so much blood, why daddy wasn't moving. Erica, with what must have been her last ounce of strength, looked at Joseph McEnroe and begged him. "Please," she said, her voice weak, barely audible. "We love you. You don't have to do this. Please don't hurt my babies. Please." She was begging for her children's lives, offering forgiveness, offering love, trying anything to save Olivia and Nathan. Joseph McEnroe later told investigators that he shot Erica first, gave her a fatal shot. So she didn't have to watch her children die, as if that was mercy, as if killing a mother before murdering her children was somehow compassionate. Then he turned the gun on 5-year-old Olivia and shot her execution style, and then 3-year-old Nathan. But here's the detail that haunts everyone who's heard this story. The detail that makes it somehow even worse than it already is. Before Joseph shot him, little Nathan, 3 years old, still clutching his stuffed animal, watching his parents and sister die around him, picked up 2 phone batteries that had fallen from his mother's phone. He held them up to Joseph McEnroe, like he was offering them as a gift, like he was trying to help, like maybe if he gave the man what he wanted, the man would stop hurting people. 3 years old, facing his own execution, and his instinct was to try to give the killer something to make him happy. Joseph McEnroe took the batteries from Nathan's tiny hand, and then he shot him in the head. Nathan Anderson died on his grandparents' floor on Christmas Eve, still holding his stuffed animal, killed by his aunt's boyfriend for no reason whatsoever except that he was there. 6 people dead. 3 generations of the Anderson family, murdered in one day. On Christmas Eve, Wayne, 60, Judy, 61, Scott, 32, Erica, 32, Olivia, 5, Nathan, 3, grandparents, parents, children. An entire family tree cut down in hours. Michelle and Joseph left the bodies where they fell, stepped over them, left the house and drove away like nothing had happened. The bodies weren't discovered until December 26th, Boxing Day. Judy Anderson had a co-worker who was supposed to meet her that day. When Judy didn't show up and didn't answer her phone, the co-worker got worried. Judy was reliable, always on time, always answered her phone. The co-worker drove to the Anderson house, found the door unlocked, walked inside calling for Judy, and found a massacre. 6 bodies, blood everywhere, Christmas decorations still up, presents still wrapped under the tree. The crime scene was so horrific that multiple first responders, experienced police officers and paramedics who'd seen terrible things in their careers had to step outside to compose themselves. Children's bodies, a family slaughtered in their own home on Christmas. Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were arrested within days. They'd left enough evidence that tracking them down was straightforward. During interrogation, Michelle's stated motive was that her brother Scott owed her $40,000. That her parents had taken his side, that they'd been unfair to her financially. Investigators couldn't find any evidence of this alleged debt. There was no $40,000, no financial records showing Scott owed Michelle anything. No evidence that Wayne and Judy had taken sides or been unfair. It appears Michelle had manufactured this grievance in her mind, had convinced herself she was owed money that didn't exist, had worked herself into such a rage over an imaginary slight that she decided to murder her entire family. And Joseph McEnroe, who had no connection to the Andersons except through Michelle, who had no personal stake in any family dispute, went along with it, helped plan it, helped execute it, shot children in the head. Both were convicted and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Michelle Anderson is currently incarcerated at the Washington Correction Center for Women. Joseph McEnroe is at Washington State Penitentiary. They will die in prison, but no amount of punishment brings back Wayne, Judy, Scott, Erica, Olivia, and Nathan. No amount of justice changes the fact that a family gathered for Christmas and were systematically executed. No amount of time heals the trauma of the first responders who found those bodies, the 911 operator who heard Erica's desperate pleas, the community that lost 6 people in one day. Carnation, Washington, that small, safe Norman Rockwell town where nothing bad ever happens, had to grapple with the worst family murder in state history happening in their quiet community. The Anderson murders are considered the deadliest family massacre in Washington state history. 6 people, 3 generations, all killed in a matter of hours on Christmas Eve, discovered on Boxing Day. And it wasn't a random home invasion. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't even a crime of passion or a sudden snap. It was premeditated, planned. Executed methodically by a daughter who decided her parents' and brother's family didn't deserve to live. The house where it happened still stands. Nobody wants to buy it. It sits empty, a monument to what happened there. Every Christmas, people in Carnation remember the Andersons. Remember that Christmas isn't always safe. That family doesn't always mean safety. That on December 24th, 2007, 6 people went to a Christmas Eve gathering and never left alive. And that their bodies were found on December 26th, Boxing Day, turning what should have been a day of leftover turkey and family time into a day of unimaginable horror. December 22, 1987, rural Arkansas. Ronald Gene Simmons was 47 years old. He was a retired military man, 23 years of service split between the Navy and Air Force. He'd served his country, had honorable discharges, was the kind of person who, on paper, looked like a model citizen. He lived on a rural property outside Russellville, Arkansas, a small town about 70 miles northwest of Little Rock. The property was isolated, acres of land, no close neighbors, the kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you. Ronald lived there with his wife Rebecca and their children. Multiple children from multiple relationships. It was a complicated blended family situation. But by December 1987, several of his adult and teenage children still lived at home or visited regularly. From the outside, they seemed like a normal rural family, maybe a bit isolated. Maybe a bit strict. Ronald ran the household with military discipline, but nothing that would raise red flags. What nobody knew was that Ronald Gene Simmons had a dark secret, a secret that had been festering for years, a secret that was about to explode in the most horrific way possible. For years, possibly as long as a decade, Ronald had been sexually abusing his daughter Sheila. Not just inappropriate touching, not just one incident. Systematic, ongoing sexual abuse that resulted in Sheila becoming pregnant with her father's child. Let that sink in for a moment. Ronald Gene Simmons had raped his daughter repeatedly over years and had fathered a child with her through incestuous abuse. Sheila eventually left home, got away from her father, and at some point the truth about what Ronald had done began to come out. Family members were starting to learn about the abuse, about the child, about the years of horror Sheila had endured. Ronald knew it was only a matter of time before he'd be exposed, before he'd face consequences, before his military veteran reputation would be destroyed and he'd potentially face criminal charges. Rather than face accountability, Ronald Gene Simmons decided to kill everyone who knew his secret, which meant killing his entire family. On December 22, 1987, Ronald began his massacre. First, he shot his wife, Rebecca, the woman he'd been married to for years, the mother of his children. He shot her and then disposed of her body. Then he killed his eldest son, Gene Jr., who was 26 years old. Shot him multiple times. Gene's wife, Renata, was next. She'd done nothing except marry into this family. She died because she was there. Then Ronald strangled his 3-year-old granddaughter, Sylvia, a toddler, a baby. He put his hands around her tiny neck and squeezed until she stopped breathing. 4 people dead on day 1. But Ronald wasn't finished, not even close. He'd made his children dig a pit weeks earlier under the pretense that they were building an outhouse, an outdoor toilet, common in rural areas without plumbing. The kids had no idea they were digging their own mass grave. Ronald dumped Rebecca, Gene Jr., Renata, and little Sylvia into that pit. Then he waited. For the next 4 days, Ronald went about his normal routine. He'd go to the local bar in Russellville, have a few drinks, chat with locals, act completely normal. Then he'd return home to a house that contained bodies in the backyard and wait for more victims. His remaining children were away, some at school, some working, some living elsewhere. But Ronald knew they'd all be coming home for Christmas. That was the plan. That was the tradition. Everyone comes home for Christmas. So he waited. Over the next 4 days, as each of his children came home for Christmas break, Ronald killed them. 17-year-old Loretta came home from school. Ronald drowned her. He held her head in a barrel of water until she stopped struggling, until her lungs filled with water, until she died. Then he put her body in the pit. 14-year-old Eddie came home. Ronald drowned him the same way, held his teenage son's head underwater until he was dead. 11-year-old Marianne, drowned, body in the pit. 8-year-old Becky, the youngest, a 3rd grader, still believed in Santa Claus. probably excited about Christmas, about seeing family, about presents and cookies and all the things 8-year-olds love about the holidays. Ronald drowned her in the barrel like he'd drowned her siblings, an 8-year-old child held underwater by her own father until she died. 4 more children dead, 4 more bodies in the pit. Ronald sat in that house for days, knowing his children's bodies were outside, knowing he'd murdered his wife and 8 family members, and he felt nothing, showed no remorse, just waited for the next phase of his plan. December 26th. Boxing Day. More family members were coming to visit. Adult children from Ronald's previous relationships who didn't live at home but were coming for a post-Christmas gathering. They were bringing their own families, their spouses, their children. They arrived at Ronald's property expecting a family gathering, expecting to see relatives, exchange gifts, eat a meal together. Instead, they walked into an ambush. Ronald had set up a shooting position, had weapons ready, had planned every detail. As his family members arrived and entered the house, Ronald systematically shot them. Barbara, 21 years old, Ronald's adult daughter, shot dead. Dennis, 23, shot dead. Dennis's wife, Judy, shot dead. Their 3 children, including a 21-month-old baby, not even 2 years old, barely able to walk or talk. Ronald Gene Simmons shot a baby. 9 more people killed on Boxing Day. 9 family members who'd driven to rural Arkansas to see their relatives, to celebrate the holidays, to spend time together. All dead, executed by their own family member. By the end of December 27th, Ronald had murdered 14 members of his own family. 14 people, 3 generations, systematically killed over the course of 5 days. He sat in his house surrounded by bodies and blood. He didn't panic, didn't try to run. He just drank beer and watched television like it was any other day. On December 28th, Ronald drove into Russellville, the nearby town where he'd been drinking at the bar throughout his killing spree, where nobody suspected him of anything. But he wasn't done killing. He went to the law firm where a woman worked, a woman who'd rejected his romantic advances months earlier, a woman who'd had the audacity to tell Ronald Gene Simmons she wasn't interested in him. He shot her dead in her office. Then he went to a place where he'd previously worked, shot 2 former co-workers, killed both of them, shot 4 others, wounding them but not fatally. 2 more dead. 4 more wounded. 16 murders total. 14 family members and 2 others. 4 more wounded, all in less than a week. Ronald's final body count, 16 dead, 4 wounded. When police finally caught up with him, Ronald didn't resist, didn't try to run or fight or kill more people. He surrendered calmly, confessed to everything, showed investigators where the bodies were buried, described in detail how he'd killed each person. He showed no remorse, no emotion, just matter-of-fact explanations of how he'd executed his family. During the investigation, the truth about Sheila came out. The sexual abuse, the incest, the child he'd fathered with his own daughter. Psychologists believe this is what triggered the massacre. Ronald knew his secret was coming out, knew he'd be exposed as a child rapist who'd abused his daughter for years. Rather than face that shame, that accountability, he decided to eliminate everyone who knew. If they were all dead, the secret would die with them. That was his logic. Ronald Gene Simmons went to trial, was convicted on multiple counts of capital murder, was sentenced to death. He actively fought against appeals, told his lawyers he didn't want them to try to save him, said he wanted to die, that he deserved death. On June 25, 1990, Ronald Gene Simmons became the first person executed by lethal injection in Arkansas. He was 49 years old. He'd been on death row for less than 3 years, an incredibly short time between conviction and execution. Before he died, Ronald issued a statement, not an apology, not expressing remorse, just a statement saying he thought the death penalty was appropriate for his crimes. He was strapped to a gurney. The drugs were administered. and Ronald Gene Simmons died, taking with him whatever twisted psychology had allowed him to murder 16 people, including 8 of his own children, a 3-year-old granddaughter, and a 21-month-old baby. The Simmons family massacre remains one of the deadliest familicides in American history. 14 family members killed by one man over the course of 5 days, with multiple murders occurring specifically on Boxing Day, December 26, 1987. The property where it happened is abandoned now. Nobody wants to live where such horror occurred. The pit where Ronald buried his family has been filled in, but the land itself is considered cursed. Russellville, Arkansas, a small town that just wanted to have a quiet Christmas, had to deal with the aftermath of 16 murders committed by someone who'd lived among them, who'd seemed normal, who'd drunk beer at their local bar while bodies decomposed at his home. Sheila Simmons, the daughter who'd been abused, who'd inadvertently triggered the massacre by the truth starting to come out, survived. She wasn't at the property during the killings. She's had to live with the knowledge every Boxing Day, people who study true crime remember the Simmons massacre. Remember that on December 26, 1987, 9 people showed up to a family gathering and were executed. Remember that Christmas 1987 in rural Arkansas wasn't about joy or family or celebration. It was about a father who drowned his children one by one as they came home from school. About a grandfather who shot a baby. About a man who'd rather commit the worst familicide in American history than admit what he'd done. And it's a reminder that the worst monsters aren't the ones in horror movies. They're the ones who sit next to you at the dinner table, who've served their country, who seem normal until they're not. 3 stories, 3 different kinds of horror, but all connected by one date. December 26th, Boxing Day. Jane Kreba went shopping and was gunned down by gang members who didn't care about the thousands of innocent people around them. A 15-year-old honor student became a statistic because she was in the wrong place at the wrong second. The Anderson family gathered for Christmas Eve and were systematically executed by their own daughter and her boyfriend. 6 people across 3 generations, including 2 small children, murdered for an imaginary debt. Their bodies found on Boxing Day. And Ronald Gene Simmons spent nearly a week killing his family one by one, culminating in 9 murders on Boxing Day specifically, all to hide the fact that he'd been raping his daughter. These aren't fictional stories designed to scare you. These are real events. Real people, real families destroyed. Jane's parents have spent 20 years advocating for gun violence prevention, trying to make meaning from their daughter's senseless death. The Anderson family was wiped out. There's nobody left to mourn them except friends and community members who remember. The Simmons victims have been largely forgotten except by true crime researchers. Their deaths overshadowed by the sheer horror of what Ronald did. But they deserve to be remembered, not as statistics, not as case files, but as real people who had lives, families, futures that were stolen from them. So this Boxing Day, while you're returning gifts, or shopping sales, or spending time with family, remember Jane, Scott, Erica, Olivia, Nathan, and the 14 members of the Simmons family. Remember that horror doesn't take holidays. That violence can strike anywhere, anytime, even on days that should be safe. And that the worst nightmares aren't the ones that wake you at 3 a.m. They're the ones that happen in broad daylight, on crowded streets, in family homes, on days that should be filled with joy. This has been the Ungodly Hour. Thank you.